again. Perkeleen siihen kohta. Zo, Daniel.
Welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, a show about art, culture, politics, etc., all with a sensible centrist perspective. That is the official rebranding, isn't it, Ludwig Path?
Yeah, we're the true center now. We're not.
We're the true center.
We're not the
yes.
true right anymore. Oh.
Yes, and I am excited today to. A couple of weeks ago, we had a took a turn at the Gen Xers, and this week we're going to have a look at the boomers for a minute and moan about them. You've seemed quite excited as well, Ludwig Path, when we talked about this earlier this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fun topic. Like boomer-con bashing is like one of my favorite hobbies, honestly. So I'm
It's
sitting
a simple
ready now.
one, but it doesn't really go out of style, right?
It's evergreen, baby.
It's evergreen.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, it is. So we're ready now from our mom's basements with our diapers on, and we have our safety blankets, the safety words, and we're ready to take a shot at the real men who built the country.
Exactly. And with us, someone who has made great content lately bashing a couple of boomer cons and recently did a very good video on Dave Ramsey. We have Witticism TV. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
That's
good to talk to
our
you.
pleasure. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. Now, before we get going, we have to be good YouTubers and tell everyone about our social media. So why don't you go ahead first, Witticism TV? Tell us about how people can find your stuff.
You can find me here on YouTube at Witticism TV. I also have a Twitter and Telegram, all at the same handle of Witticism TV.
Okay, very good. And before I shill, why don't you tell the audience, if they're not very familiar with your stuff, what are you about? What do you do?
I'm just a regular guy who makes political videos and puts them on the internet. I have a dissident right slant, although I'm not, like officially part of the dissident right or anything, or the sensible center, I should say. If my dad knew that I was on the NPR for the sensible center, he'd slap me right now.
Yeah, it's something that seems to stick. But I like the moniker. Some people may try to go for the American shock jock talk radio style of a lot of style, but it's not our groove, is it, Ludwig Path?
No, I mean, I probably expressed it before, but I don't like the standard, angry conservative American talk radio style of doing this. I really just want to feel a different niche with this show. So as far as shielding goes, yeah, people probably heard that I have a Twitter account now, so you can follow me at Ludwig Path at Twitter or my YouTube, where I post memes regularly. That's that's pretty much it, but it's good content. So
yes, and for myself, I also have a Twitter account with the A Walrus name. I think it's at Walrus in a suit. If you're looking for it, you can find me there. Recently, it's mostly been moaning about Jordan Peterson. There's also the Matrix channel in the description, which is sort of like Discord, but it's encrypted so that no one can snoop in on what we're talking about. Doesn't mean that we're talking about anything illegal, but it means that we're talking about some spicy stuff at times. So if you enjoy what we're talking about here and you would like to interact more with people who share these interests, you can join us there. Is that everything in our description? Did I miss something? Let me double check. It is also my Telegram, if you're interested in that. I usually post things that I can't post on Twitter there, or I mirror my Twitter tweets over to Telegram. All right. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the boomer bashing, we are going to talk shortly about some current events, and then we're going to talk a bit about the economy for 5 minutes. And I think we want to start with Germany, because something weird happened in Germany a couple of days ago. Maybe it was last night. I don't have the time zones correct here. I think we're talking like 24 hours ago. 24 hours ago, the German police raided a far-right and ex-military group in Germany and detained 25 people, among them as it says here, a minor aristocrat in Germany called Heinrich the 13th, if my Roman numerals are correct, who wanted to perform a coup and instate him as the, I assume, king or emperor of Germany. And after it is just a very bizarre, we can sit here and say that it's, oh man, imagine if they did it, right? But it's a very bizarre thing to have happen in current year of 2022 after everything that's happened the past 10 years. Someone trying to actually install someone like this. It sounds like when we talked about it earlier, Ludwig, I said that it sounds like the plot for like a Battlefield game or something.
Yeah, this is Modern Warfare 2. Call
right.
of Duty or something like that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
That sounds very plausible. That's why
Yeah.
I mean immediately you think that this is some kind of a psyop or something. But I mean,
It
granted,
is-
it's real. Given like where Germany is currently, I'm not really surprised that some people felt like they needed to do something like this. I'm not
It
endorsing,
does
of course,
feel-
but maybe it's real, right?
I'm pulling some, external thoughts here from a discussion that I saw in the deep lore regarding this, and there seems to be a sentiment that the elites in Germany aren't necessarily all on one page, and the prospect of a Germany that would be willing to work more closely with Russia is very dangerous to anyone else geopolitically. And there's very little information about this, but given the seriousness of the response from the German government to this, it is clear that this poses quite a bit of a threat. This is a real, this was a real potential enemy castle, right? And well, I guess we'll just have to see where it goes from here when the police gives out more information about this. The article itself here that I'm highlighting is more just for background fluff. I mean, it quite quickly like devolves into, COVID-19 conspiracy theorists and QAnon and, trying to connect all the dots of the right-wing boogeymen. So
I just wonder, like, for the old history people, like, say that this coup attempt has succeeded. What's like the next step forward? Is it universal condemnation from like the EU and the UN, and they just refuse to cooperate with them, or does everybody just pretend like nothing happened and it just goes on as usual with like this guy as
no
the
idea. Like, what's the
chancellor
next...
or something?
Come on, guys. I mean, I know like 40% of the chat probably plays Hearts of Iron 4 or something. What's the next logical step here? What's the next policy?
It's so alien, like in these modern managerial regimes, for something like this to happen. I mean, if it was a third world country in Africa and you said that this happened, then I mean, I think it would just be another day at the office, right? People just, okay, we're dealing with this guy now, but a little bit awkward, I think, in like a large industrial country like Germany.
It does feel kind of strange, yes. And considering the seriousness, I mean, Nordana says, of course they're serious, they're German, insert laugh track. But the seriousness of the operation, I mean, this wasn't just, a random terrorist cell. This wasn't jihadis trying to cause, terror. This was someone who seemingly had a very clear agenda and plan, and that's not something you see very often from the right, to be honest. When it happens, it usually, goes. Unfortunately, it ends with a lot of people dead.
Well, I also think it's funny how you can see where they only really have one move against this type of thing, against any sort of rebellion at all. Like whether you're a meme lord on Twitter, shit posting, or whether you're actually legitimately trying to cross the Rubicon, they have the same move. It's like, QAnon, COVID-19, the deep state. You're a racist, anti-Semitic. It's
by going by this article, I mean, we're pretty much supporters of this Heinrich the 13th, right?
yeah, we get treated the exact same.
No, we're in the sensible center, right? So we're not affiliated with this. So at least I was happy that
I'm saying
I'm
that
not, at least I'm not a right winger, right?
This woman, Mariana Spring, this extremist journalist, is trying to place us in the same group as these guys, right?
Yeah, it's typical extremist behavior. I wonder, like, what his first decree would be when he was instated. Is that Burger King goes back to having regular burgers in Germany, and they don't serve veggie burgers as the normal one. We need to get some sanity back into the country for once.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm curious what his policies would actually be, or like what his vision for the country is. He's kind of like a nobody to me. I don't know anything about him.
He seems to be a nobody to most people, and certainly I wasn't aware of him. Like, I was aware that there exists aristocrats in Germany in the same way that there still exists an aristocracy in places like, pretty much everywhere else in Europe. But it's mostly just honorary titles these days. Maybe you own some land, right?
Yeah, they mostly just get up to, like, this sort of globe shit, travel the world, be an influencer,
you like fundraisers and
jet setter, fundraisers, concerts, whatever. I guess some people have different hobbies, different interests, like this guy.
Yeah. His daughters poses for like fashion magazines because they're his daughters, but he's different. He's trying to make something of himself.
Now, this may be way out in left field, but do you think that there were people who sort of were immune to the denazification that happened after World War II? They've just kind of been a silent but still existent part of Germany? This is kind of what that is.
I will say maybe not the average German, but what I've heard, as I said, parts of the German elite are not on board with the globo homo, as someone like to call it. But that's all I could say.
The Nazi sleeper cells, they have awoken once they came down from the moon base, or from Brazil or something.
Yeah, from Antarctica or something. Yeah. We'll keep an eye on this. I mean, as far as this goes, it's not very. The details are sparse. Let's put it like that. Which makes it all the more interesting because it means that the police are taking this very seriously. Which means that someone is taking this very seriously in the power structure of the German government.
Yeah, okay. I mean, at least just a finishing point here. I think it's interesting because we're apparently at a point now where it's not just talk anymore. Because I feel like it's been, we've been going for almost 20 years where people have been just complaining about everything, and it's so bad. And at some point, something's going to happen. And well, now it looks like this stuff is like actually happening. In terms of the dissatisfaction people have reaching a sort of boiling point where you see stuff like this.
This moment here could very well be one of those history books moments where you get like 50 years from now, on some kid on a test has to rattle this off as to reasons for the Third World War, right?
That's actually, it's not implausible.
I'm gonna say something. Oh yeah, regarding the like Germans taking on the denazification stuff, I do know that in terms of industry, and someone said that I expected German industry to put up a better, more organized fight against the GAE. The Germans have sort of been rejecting parts of it in their own way. The Germans have been sort of very lax with a lot of the environmentalism and the sort of what's it called? It's a specific word, like not governmental. It's a fancy word that means like the green stuff and following like equality laws and basically that whole industry. So they don't like following them, but they tend to do that. But they tend to skirt the rules whenever they can. Has been my experience of it. Not sure if any of you guys have any thoughts on that.
I can neither confirm or deny that, but I mean, it seems plausible to me. It's they do live on their industry, right? So it's quite a pain for them to go through with it, even though they're
ESG, says Leo. Yes, environmental, social, and governance, I think is the word.
I wasn't sure if that's what
Economic,
you
okay.
meant, right?
Economic, social governance. Okay, that's it. It's basically, the whole gay industry is shifting towards that. It's the HR ladies, the environment SARS that keeps popping up. If you know someone who works in a large, and by large I mean like in Europe, maybe 500 or more people, you will most likely have some woman somewhere in your company is the environmentalism czar that is responsible for making sure that your company is delivering useless reports to useless government agencies about how much you're not really doing for the environment, etc., etc.
Because I mean, there are like two angles to this. The ESG is like the private sector angle that comes from the BlackRocks and the Vanguards, top down. But there's also the Agenda 2030s and these more kind of UN, EU based initiatives that everybody's agreed to, and we need to cut emission in half, cut emission into 1/3 within X amount of years, and so on.
Yes,
but I mean, it's kind of the same thing. I wasn't sure if that's what you meant, like the kind of green shift thing, or if it was more specifically.
No, I just forgot the word that
stuff.
encompasses all of this. My point was that I know historically the Germans have sort of tried to push back against that stuff, especially on the environmentalism stuff. They've tried to sort of claim that they're green, but doing minimum effort. But I think they've ultimately been overrun regardless. But I would need to hear more recent reports from someone in Germany about that. My info is probably a bit old. All right, I think that's enough of this, unless you guys have anything you want to add. Nope. All right. Moving on. So I wanted to talk a bit about before we went into the boomer stuff directly. A couple of streams ago, I think it was the women's stream. You can go in the backlog and look at that. But on the women's stream, Leo and I talked a bit about everything being expensive and it's sad times ahead and the economy for Scandinavia, etc. So I wanted to just have a quick look at some of the numbers to see what that means for us out here who are not boomers. Let me pull up an image here real quick, because we're in a bit of a strange situation here in the Nordics or in Scandinavia. And maybe some of the commenters can confirm if this is the same for their respective Scandinavian country, because I'm going to be talking about Norway specifically, because that's what I know. So please confirm or deny if the situation as I describe it is the same. And I'm not really, I'm no economist, and I'm not sitting with all the answers, but I am interested in this stuff, and things are getting a bit weird in terms of the politics of it, at least. So the first graph I just wanted to highlight here to try to paint a picture for us millennials, I guess, would be, hopefully this will come through fine. Need to restart my presentation here. Where is it? I think this is the one. Can you guys see that? Is it
Yeah,
blurry?
nicely. Maybe you should zoom
Okay.
in a little bit.
Okay, is this better?
One more time. Let's see. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Yeah, it's a bit blurry. I don't know why. I'm sorry. But basically, this first graph is, and I'm sorry, this is screenshots that I've like copied from articles, etc. So I can't really I can't translate them very well. But this is the total unsecured debt in Norway, and for anyone who isn't, very interested in this stuff, unsecured debt basically means any loan that doesn't have any collateral. So, a housing loan would be a secured debt because you can, at the end of the day, the bank is able to take control of your property and sell that. But say like a student loan is an unsecured debt because there's no no collateral there. And a student loan debt is very typical for a lot of people. So this is in billions. Now this is in Norwegian kroner. So I checked today, the Norwegian kroner is actually it's $10. So you can basically just shave off. It's starting here in 2019 at about 175. So it's about 17 billion USD. And this is the total unsecured debt in Norway. So we're talking about 5 million people. Now it is around, we'll get to that later, but you can see it slowly decreases over time. And the reason why it does that is that Norwegians have had a bit of a weird relationship with unsecured debt. A lot of credit companies with, let's say, dubious practices were sort of running rampant in the 2010s, and this led to a quite substantial increase in unsecured debt. Now, if you add as well, the state is the creditor for everyone's students' loans, and the state is pushing everyone pretty much through university. I mean, that's the standard for any liberal democracy.
Maybe I'll just just add that of course,
sure. Interrupt me at any
student loans
time.
in Norway, it's not, I mean, of course, like you said, it's not secured debt, but that doesn't really paint a good picture of the problem, because the terms of like the Norwegian student loan, it's like a very, what you'd call it, a very kind loan. It's a very friendly contract as contrasted with the American student debt. It's a little bit more harsh. I mean, the Norwegian student debt it's bankruptable for one. You can sort of extend the amount of time that you spend paying the loan. It's very low interest rates for one. And
not only
that,
they do a weird thing, because I looked into this a couple of years ago after I wanted to pay down more on my student loan. But the thing is that the state basically calculates how much you're supposed to pay. So if you pay more, they just jack up the interest rate to make sure that you're paying like they want X amount of money by the time you pay down. And whether or not you pay that amount of money over 30 years or you pay that amount of money over 10 years is the same thing for them, as long as they get their, let's say, $50,000, right? So if you try to be a good boy and pay back your loans quickly, they're just going to, raise your interest to make sure that you end up paying the same amount. So they actually don't want you to pay that loan back, weirdly enough, faster than you actually have to.
Yeah, so Dave Ramsey is crying already.
But
that's what you get with a socialist country, right? But again,
exactly.
Like the student loan, at least in Norway, it's like the smallest problem. I mean, what this is more endemic of is, like you said, the credit card companies and consumer debts, as generally understood, as these kind of high interest rate loans that you can get that maybe like 10-12% interest for. I mean, you basically
Citibank loans and like stuff like that. for other Europeans. They might be
It's
aware of that.
something you typically get to get consumer goods. That's like not to buy assets that are going to be money producing, like say like a house or something that can be
Or a down
secured.
payment on a TV, or
Yes, electronics is a perfect example.
Yeah.
To make things a little bit more concrete. Like you have, I've seen computer stores do this. Like Komplett is one of the largest computer hardware retailers in Norway, and they have their own like consumer loan bank. Basically, that's
they have their own bank. Yeah.
It's I think it's one of the biggest consumer loan banks as well, that just gives people high interest rate loans so they can buy like CPUs and graphics cards and so on. Other things, like say you want to buy a boat, or you want to go travel or something, and people will just take out loans for that. But I mean, the problem is that it's so tailored and marketed to people with a very high time preference and low impulse control.
Yeah,
so
I wanted to comment on that, because these types of predatory practices is what's led to this high amount of debt, right? And my sort of first reaction, which I noted as the Austrian economist in me, would argue that, well, I mean, we're living in a society where the failure in this industry is the fault of like this weird combination of government and private enterprise stepping on each other's toes, right? But at the same time, we sort of discussed this the other day as well, Ludwig, in our private chat, that the elite theorist in me, which I would say in 2022 seems to have a lot more success using that lens. That elite theorist in me tells me that most people have no business or no need for the intellectual and psychological, I guess, overhead that comes with managing your own personal economy. So hard barriers against this is pretty much the only way of preventing these high time preference people from being exploited, basically.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. And I've yet to hear, maybe someone in the comments can tell me, I've yet to hear a good kind of free market Austrian economist defense around why like consumer debt and credit cards is like the government's fault. It seems to be perfectly in line with free market principles to set up a bank that gives, consumer loans at high interest because it's unsecured. So you need a higher interest, and then you need the debt collection companies.
I will
and then
say
you need,
that in Norway specifically, I'll throw a bone to the Austrian economist in me and say that the way debt and being able to bankrupt yourself and then sort of being bailed out by the state makes it a lot easier for these kinds of companies to take risks on customers, because they know that they're going to get a larger amount than nothing back, right? Because if you default on these things, at some point the state's going to come in and basically put you on a plan that forces you to pay back as much as possible. And if that's not possible, then these companies still get some out of some sort of, I forget the name of it, but it's some sort of like defaulting solution that makes sure that they get some of their money back. So it's easier for these companies in Norway to like put money basically on these retards and then basically make them slaves for a set amount of years. And
I agree that
once they go broke, they still get some money back, right?
The government incentives can be perverse there, but if you have like this completely free system where everything's based on a voluntary transaction, there's nothing that stops you from like securing the loan with your kidney or something.
That's true,
right?
Yeah.
So I like, this is something that I just it's just a hard problem, I think, for the Austrian economists. They just have to concede like this is a lot of this, the Ancapistan society is just going to be debt slavery, right? Because of this, because you have like these high time preference people who will just try to sell their liver or something to buy a boat or something like that. And I mean, you could get them into indentured servitude, and that would probably be better for them, because it's, I mean, ultimately it's like,
in my notes here, I wrote return to feudalism.
we reached the same conclusion here, that these people you don't have, it's just too, like you said, too much of an overhead for them to deal with the inputs and outputs of a person running a personal economy in a modern industrialized nation, right? It's a pretty big headache, I think, for most people. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's sort
sorry,
of a
go
nice segue into what we're going to be talking about here, which is really the idea of like the financial news or the financial entertainment as is, where you have people like Dave Ramsey and so on. I mean,
Yeah.
just quickly before that, I mean, in Norway we have the what's that guy's name? You know, the luxury trap. That's the translated name, Luksusfellen. The
Yeah. I know they have it in Sweden and Denmark as well.
Yes, and
it's
I mean,
a TV show where they get a bunch of economists to help out people who have landed themselves in sometimes outrageous amounts of debt.
Yeah, and of course the economist titles are for credibility, right? But you don't really need that. It's like with most of these shows, if you are like a fairly sound mind, a person of sound mind, you can watch 2 episodes and you've sort of learned everything you need to know about personal finance, and the rest of it is just Dr. Phil, right? I mean, you're just going to be dealing with Dr. Phil or like Gordon Ramsay Kitchen Nightmares. You're just going to have some guy screaming at someone else for being a moron for 2 hours, and that's kind of your entertainment in a sense. But like you said, looking at some of these people, you wonder why, like, if the feudal system wasn't better for them than what they're currently having to deal with.
Well, even despite all of those perverse incentives, the graph still goes down, right? I mean,
we're getting to that because the graph has been going down since 2019, as you pointed out.
I mean, I think the American graph would go completely the opposite way.
Yes,
yeah,
I mean,
I would agree.
This is because of government intervention, right? Because in like the 2019, they started what was called like the
registry.
Yes.
For the official debt registry, which means that any company that wants to loan you money have to check your current debt in this registry, and they can only loan you money if you're not already loaded down with debt. So it's kind of like a credit score, but it has actual hard limits, which means that if someone is actually, like these people on the show that we talk about, they're already in debt, and then they're trying to do something stupid and buy like a 100-inch flat screen TV for $10,000 on a credit loan. The creditors actually aren't allowed to give him that loan because the registry will tell them that nope, you're not allowed. You're already loaded. So this is why this graph goes down until 2021. And I would say another reason that it goes down, that's a personal theory, is COVID-19, because people had a lot less expenses during 2020 and 2021, at least in Norway. Now that some of those expenses were spent elsewhere, like say in home improvements, but for a lot of people that meant that they could pay down more than they would be able to before. So the latest figures I was able to find was from October this year. So this is after everything has gotten more expensive. The current number is around 150 billion, or I mean 15 billion USD. So it's almost to 140, but then it goes out to 150 this year. So the stimulus from the government as well, I would say, is another reason, because it basically kept the economy chugging along during COVID. But this graph in itself isn't, very interesting. It's just, we have a lot of debt. All right.
I mean, my question is then, like with the debt registry, and you look at this graph, and I think it's sort of an absolute positive, but on the other side, it is kind of an invasive thing where it does sort of centralize the entire system, right? So I like
Yes.
with most things, I am a little bit, of two minds when it comes to
as
this.
Russell Williams points out here, the risk is supposed to regulate the bank. If the government can tax everyone else to cover the bank's risk, then there is no stop on predatory lending. Exactly. That is the Austrian economy, the Austrian economist argument here. But anyway, this sort of just adds itself on top of everything else in 2022. That's pretty much the only reason I have this graph here, because I found an article from earlier this year. Now, this is before any shenanigans with Ukraine, any gas prices, any energy bills. So during a survey in, I think it was January or February or something this year, it was reported that about 1 in 5 Norwegians are unable to sustain an unexpected expense of about $2,000. And $2,000 might sound like a lot, but anyone, in the chat who either owns a home or has a family would know that something breaks, $2,000 isn't necessarily an outrageous sum. It is quite nice to have $2,000 in your rainy day fund for when the AC goes out or something happens. I also don't have any numbers of the age groups here or any geographical location. So, this might be every pensioner in Norway can't support this, but I can't confirm or deny it. Though I doubt it's that one-sided.
Well, I mean, you have a lot of middle-class people who have debt maxed, right? I mean, you showed the graphs with consumer debts, but there are, of course, like non-consumer debt, like mortgages and so on.
And we will get to that because I'll talk about mortgages and the interest rates on mortgages soon. But from my own experience in buying a home, my advisor at the bank who I picked him because I knew him from before, so I know that he's a common sense guy. Was told us that a lot of banks will tell you that you can just loan 100% as far as you can go, right? But you shouldn't do that. You should have a sizable margin for errors. So don't debt max, as you called it. Like that. If you have to loan enough that you can have an overhead in case the bad times come.
Yeah, Ramsey would call this being house poor.
He would call that being house poor, but that's unfortunately the model that exists in Norway. I mean, Ramsey would probably pop an artery if he tried to buy a home here.
Yeah, somewhere he just felt a shiver go down his back.
Exactly. There's a whole nation out there designed to make people house poor.
Yes, and I mean it's so strange because like with Norway being as rich as it is and the social system being as extensive as it's like there's no reason why it should be like this, But it seems like to be almost like a law of nature that people are just going to debt max, like whatever levels they're at, and how much they can get. Well, that's how much they're going to get. It's almost like a force of nature. They just keep taking the free money or
there's
the cheap
another
money.
There's another sort of free market argument here, because a couple of years ago the government introduced a rule about how much you can loan max, a centralized rule. Now there is some wiggle room for the individual banks and the individual person, but I think it's something like for your housing loan you cannot loan more than 4 or 5 times your income, yearly income before tax.
Yeah. It's 5 times yearly income before tax subtracted by the debt that you already have, and then they'll subtract stuff like, you say, if you have kids, they'll subtract that from the amount that you have, and there's some other rules in the rule sheet about
of course, but there's a hard limit, and the point is that once there's a hard limit, then and the state is sort of the backer of this, then the game is, well, how far can I get against that hard limit, right? How far up against that hard limit can we get? Because that's the weird thing about setting limits, right? You also,
but of course, I think the hard limit has
going lower.
Yeah, but of course, the hard limit has it is a limit. I do think it is kind of healthier for most people to have that there, because the temptation is always there to max,
well,
to make up numbers, right?
The bank should be able to make that call, right? The bank should be able to look at you and your earning potential and say,
they can,
more money than this.
Problem is that you might have nepotism within the bank, or you could have a guy who has multiple banks, right? That's the problem with the debt registry, where you would have, like, I talked to my money manager in the bank, or my loan manager, and he told me that, I mean, he's seen some things you wouldn't believe. It's like the Roy Batty and Blade Runner. I've seen things you wouldn't believe, where you would look at some guy who will come into the office like in a Tesla, and he has a 3-piece suit on, and well groomed, shaven, Rolex watch and everything, and he's just he's like a billionaire in debt because he's just been going around to different banks maxing out, just like say with these consumer banks, you go and apply at one consumer bank and then another and another, and because they don't know about each other, right, it all seems credible. And this stuff used to be self-reported back in the day, so like, I mean, if you imagine if you go back to the 80s and stuff, I mean, they don't have the registry where they can coordinate the stuff. It's just like, no, you just write on a piece of paper how much money you make. It's like, oh, you make 2 million a year. Okay, you can get 5 times that, right? 10 times. Let's see. Out there, we call that "big hat, no cattle" from Paul Moosefish.
I just thought it was a funny expression.
It's quite. He said it's a lot more typical than you think. I mean, you probably end up interacting with a lot of these people, and I have done that. Like, when I was trying to rent out a house to a person, and I had to just check some references, and he made some claims about his finances, and I was able to look into it, and it was just he was just in a sort of mess in terms of debt. I couldn't believe how much debt he was in, but that's apparently he had been doing that and just buying Teslas and watches and boats and stuff on credit.
It's quite common.
Well, at least you guys have some sort of common sense rules about this stuff. I think America's so far beyond the pale. If we instituted a rule like that, I think the housing market would collapse.
Yeah, I mean, America is sort of the worst case example for how the intertwining of state legislation and free market predatory practices can sort of be utilized to its most destructive ends. It seems like you're trying to show everyone how to make hell on earth financially. It's very strange, I have to say.
Yeah, we just throw out all common sense, and it's just like it's game on. It's all fake money. It doesn't mean anything. And now
Being said,
we're seeing
I mean, we do have some questionable stuff going on here. So the picture I'm sort of working on painting here is, with this article, we're in start of 2022, and things are slightly uneasy. We've been through 2 years of COVID and lockdowns, etc. People aren't very prepared for expenses. But thankfully, we live in a managed economy. And so the Central Bank of Norway is looking at the numbers at the start of 2022, and they're predicting a disaster because we get out of COVID. I say get out of COVID, I mean we get into 2022 with incredibly low unemployment, and we've retained pretty much all of our purchasing power thanks to the government. So we have to do something, because otherwise the inflation is going to run rampant and the market's going to crash. But inflation is already starting to run rampant because the US has been printing even more money between 2020 and 2022 than they have been doing for the past 10 years before that. And we're a nation that's very reliant on the petrodollar because we sell, if I recall, our oil barrels are sold in dollars. That's how that works. So this post-COVID hangover is already starting to hit us. And then, Ukraine happens. So gas prices go through the roof. They go up like thrice-fold within a month. And food prices during the rest of 2022 follow. I'll get to that later. Shipping costs get insane due to supply chain issues during 2020, 2022. So what can the Bank of Norway do? The Central Bank of Norway? Well, they only have one knob to turn, literally. The only thing the Central Bank of Norway can do is control the interest rate that they set on the loans they provide to the banks, which is kind of confusing. And we're getting into technicalities about monetary flow between the banks and the central bank, etc. But the important thing to know is that the central bank sets their interest goal basically as a specific number, and the banks tend to follow that number in terms of what ends up as the consumer loan interest. So here you can see the central bank interest rate over the past couple of years. You can see that during COVID, it's literally at zero at times, meaning that if you were to get a loan during 2021, your housing loan would probably be at maybe 2% interest, 2.5%. I think now it's about 3.5%, might go up to 4% by the start of next year if we're unlucky. So, I mean, if we're looking at this graph, we can sort of just imagine a line going slightly above it, and then you have the actual interest people are paying.
Yes, because the regional banks have to use this to set their own interest rates, right? So they're using the regional banks.
Well, they're
use the
using
central
that when
rates,
they're
and they're
engaging in
adding-
loaning money from the central bank, and that informs how they in turn set the bank to make it different, etc., etc. And we're getting into the back and forth and day loans, and this is all technicalities within like monetary theory, I think, that I'm not well equipped to talk about.
But so yes, for a typical mortgage, you'll add like maybe 1 to 2% for the regional bank as to what you're getting on top of this, and for the consumer loan, maybe you add like 6 to 8% on top of this. Of course, what has always interested me, I mean, I've heard the same ideas about the internal thinking process that goes on inside of the Norwegian central bank, but when you look at it over time and say you compare it to the United States Federal Reserve interest rates, they track each other pretty closely. So I don't even know like what's the point of having these people there. They just have to track the Federal Reserve anyway. So
they tend to track it pretty closely because we're part of the petrodollar system, which makes us more reliant on it. But that's sort of where I'm getting into why this is weird, right? Because the point of everything I've talked about this far, all of these sort of loans and expenses, etc., is that what the central bank here is doing is technically correct, increasing the overall interest rate in this manner to decrease inflation by decreasing purchasing power, by cooling down the economy, as they say. I mean, if you're Keynesian, that works in theory, right?
There is the actually crowd there, because they have the argument that the inflation is actually caused by a supply shock, right? I mean, it's because the supply got so limited during COVID that as soon as the markets open up again, when the supply stabilizes, the inflation
I would agree
will go
that
down.
there could be quite a lot of reasons behind the inflation, right? But the central bank doesn't really care. The central bank looks at the inflation and says, oh God, we have to do something. What can we do? Well, we have one button and we're going to press that button because we're the central bank and we manage the economy. And we do that by pressing the button,
Yes. I mean, and I don't know how hard they're going to go. They hit it hard as fuck back in the 80s, actually. If you have like had a longer graph where they went up to like 10% there.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about how easy the boomers had it, but of course, if you do talk to some of them, a lot of them that I know are like permanently traumatized by the 1980s, rent hike, right? They just never want to borrow money again because they got completely, slapped by this rent hike, and they had to foreclose on their, homes and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's the trail for. We can talk about that later.
But yeah, my point is that following Keynesian theory, all of this is technically the correct action. Now, some people may talk about, critics may say that, oh, you're just messing with the money supply and the tiers and the M1 and M2, etc. But, if we're, let's say they're correct. This is the theory we're working by, and it works out in the end. They're doing the right thing. But, and let me bring up a picture here. The weird thing here, and the political angle to this, is that the reality, the theory is correct, but the reality is that with everything going on right now, the single mother of 5 who already couldn't pay for electricity due to, our friends in Germany scooping up everything we can possibly produce, now also can't finance her own apartment loan. And groceries jump. This is a bit of an older article, 10%, I think we're closer to maybe 15 now, or at least they would have shrinkflationed. Is that the word? An equal amount. And gas prices are fucked. And if you don't live in the city, you own a car in Norway. That's just how it works because of nature. So that's the political issue, because it creates a massive disconnect between the average person and the institutions in the way they perceive reality. Because one of these, the institution, lives in monetary theory land, and the other one lives in the real world. And again, it's not explicitly a wrong theory, but there's not room for any other discussion here. The interest rates are going up. You're all going to get fucked. Deal with it. It's basically the message that's coming out. But the politics in this is that, well, the government built the energy trade network that connects us to Germany, which then made us vulnerable to, the whims of the Biden administration and whatever goals Russia has in Europe. The government bailed out our economy during COVID, which means that unemployment and purchasing power is too high. And now the government is telling us that we have to slow down. But they're the ones who indirectly cost this stuff, right? So
Yeah,
I said earlier that... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, you said all they have is just this one button that they can push. It's kind of like pulling a rope, but there's no slack on regular people to pull it. There's nothing
There's
left.
nothing.
I mean, these people are just barely hanging on. A 1 in 5. That's crazy.
Yeah, and again, maybe it's all pensioners, but I mean, even that's even worse, right? Imagine all these old people having to deal with this at the end of their lives. And I said earlier when we talked about sort of the return to feudalism stuff earlier that, people need these barriers for their own good, but the government has sort of done the opposite here, because now we're sort of just being tossed around by, I guess, the currents of international politics and whatever interests the globalists in power have. And I say globalists in power in our governments, because they're the ones who pushed for international energy trading. I suppose the wrong elites, right? So to connect to what we're actually going to talk about today, because I see the boomers as the real winners here, because most likely the boomers have either the capital or have the down payments done to such a degree that all of this is barely going to affect them. Some of them, I talked to my father-in-law, who is in that situation, and he's basically making enough money to where he doesn't really know what to do with it, right? And that doesn't mean he doesn't work hard. I mean, he's definitely earned it, but he's probably just going to make money off of this with more investments, right? So that's the reality for a lot of the boomers. The real pain is going to hit on the quote unquote current or the future generations. Someone like me, I'm lucky to have, and I know this flies in the face of whatever Dave Ramsey is going to say, but I'm lucky that I got into the housing market before I was 30 years old, because I'm friends with a lot of people in the age of, like, say, 24 to 35 who haven't been able to do that. And now, I mean, you're going to knock that back at least another 5 years. That is very damaging to people's not just economy, but also lives, in terms of where they're at, in terms of, like, having kids, establishing relationships, putting down roots, essentially, right?
Exactly.
The
But
boomer cons will
there's
just
the
say, well, you got to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right? Sorry, go ahead.
but there is, like, again, the actually thing from here. I mean, if the interest rate keeps going up, that might actually slow down or reverse the trend on housing prices, which is like the nature is healing part
but
here.
It hasn't done that for like 20 years, so it's going to have to crash quite hard.
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, we'll see if the interest rate keeps going up. But I think I saw some statistics that the housing market's actually gone down. Like, the price actually gone down like 2% now for, like, the first time in
it did a little bit
in 20 years. But I mean, it's going to have to go down a lot for it to be affordable. But yeah,
going to have to crash quite a lot harder for for the young people to be able to get
accelerate.
into some sort of stable future.
we have to accelerate to
Right. So I'm sorry to take up this much time, but I mean, please, in the comments, if you live in Scandinavia other than Norway, let me know what you think. Is the situation the same? Is it different? I know that America seems to be screwed from what you say, Witticism. But the people like Dave Ramsey seems to think it's just because the youngins just don't want to work, right?
Yeah, there's definitely more than just laziness going on, because it's kind of, I view the housing market or like interest rates or mortgages, it's all kind of like crypto in a way. You know, the boomers were the people saying to the moon, and reality sets in, you know, where your investment, your asset goes up so much that you're depending on a whole bunch of suckers to buy it later on. You know, that's all crypto is. You buy it when it's low, you sell it when it's high. That's kind of the whole boomer mindset. But now it's having to shift back the other way. I mean, we'd have to have a total collapse to repair what we've done, or to get prices back to where most people can afford it.
Yeah, it's the problem with the line go upism that's been plaguing a lot of the modern economy for quite a few years. But you made a video on one specific person, and that is Dave Ramsey. And I think there's two people that we're going to talk about today. It's Dave Ramsey, and I wanted to throw in Mike Rowe because you've done a video on him as well, and I have a bit of a soft spot for Mike Rowe. I like to think that his heart is in the right place, but he's unfortunately captured by the spirit of his generation.
Yeah, Dave Ramsey and Mike Rowe, I would say I agree with 90% or 95%. You know, I'm just picking on them just on the edges of stuff I disagree with them, and it's mainly just due to their age, and they just kind of refuse to update their models of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I mean, for those in the audience who are not initiated, so to say, could you just explain a little bit about the video you did on Dave Ramsey that got so much attention, and particularly like what issues people had with it? Because you had a lot of viewers, but also a lot of negativity in the comments.
Well, sure. The Dave Ramsey video came about because he was relaying a story that he had seen on Fox News, where they were interviewing Mike Rowe about that there was this figure released that 7 million men in America are not working and not even looking for work, supposedly. And so he took this opportunity to put his boomer pants on and just call everybody lazy, and you just gotta work. That was his whole motto. And I kind of, I didn't do like a super detailed breakdown of it. It was more of a reaction video where I had a more light-hearted tone.
Here it is, if anyone is interested, by the way. You can take a look at that after the show.
Yeah, people have an allergic response to what I was saying, because they're operating in the same worldview as Mike Rowe and Dave Ramsey, which is that, well, by God, this is America, and this is where dreams come true if you just put on your big boy pants and deal with it and, work through it, and if you need to work 3 jobs to make it through, well, that's what you got to do. Whereas we know that's not what they did at all. So it's a bit hypocritical.
Yeah, it's that old. It's that old. You just got to walk in there with your CV in hand and shake, shake the manager's hand and give him a wink and tell him that you're ready to.
There's the perspectives on this. I think like Radlib did a video, talking about all of this unemployment that's been hooping up since after the COVID lockdowns ended, right? Where he talked about a lot of nuanced reasons. Here's like the economist view, and here's all these groups of people that are, having all these problems, and then you have like Ramsey come in with like the Giga Chad, mega brains, like, you're all a bunch of wusses. I'm not gonna call you men. I'm gonna call you males because you're a bunch of sissies. And you sit in your mama's basement and play Call of Duty. You ought to answer the real Call of Duty and go out there and get a job. I'm not gonna pay you no living wage. That's the big brain take, and they have the soy jack radlib, nuanced.
Yeah, well, he had a line in there where he said, who determines the living wage? Well, I do. I'm the employer. I determine the wage. But that's a little silly because to me, the rent determines the wage, and like food prices determine the wage. But maybe I'm just
what we call cost of living is usually
cost of living
determines the living wage. And that might be different for each person, but places like Norway don't have a minimum wage. I mean, we have a cultural minimum wage.
Anyone I think we do actually. I think there is.
Sorry. Yeah. We have minimum wage in specific industries due to like old union stuff. But in general, we don't have a minimum wage.
Well,
and there are minimum wage in government jobs, etc. But that's because state sort of just decides on a minimum wage because that's what they do. That's what they do.
Yeah, I've been labeling Dave Ramsey and Mike Rowe as corporate simps. I think that's the best way to describe it because no matter how much conditions change, if you can't update your worldview, then the onus always comes back on just the individual, that they need to work harder.
And that's the reality, as I said earlier, the idea of you can just walk in, shake the manager's hand, and if you leave a good impression, you'll get a job. That doesn't work in 2022 because of the same generation pushing everyone through college. It means that they need like a skin sample of me before I even get to show up to an interview.
Yeah, so they want your blood test, your sperm sample, fingerprints,
my sperm
IQ
sample,
test.
just send that in a box, and they'll report back to me if they find me too right wing or something.
Yeah, you can't even get a meeting with the boss. I mean, we don't even know who the bosses are half the time.
But that is residue that comes from the like pre-managerial, pre-digital America, right? The more entrepreneurial place, and Dave Ramsey comes from Tennessee, right? And I think some of those states, the kind of deep south, are maybe a little bit behind the curve in terms of the trends, and especially with him being a boomer and everything. So, I mean, you can of course see that in an economy that's sort of entrepreneurial, where you have like the manager is also the owner, and it's like a smaller business that can't scale beyond a certain point because of limitations on technology, and like scale and so on. And you could just go in and talk to the boss because that would have been the most efficient thing for him to just have direct contact with you. But like with the current system, with like these large hedge funds, these kind of pension hedge funds that just own everything, and the ratio between owners and managers being the way that it is, and the digital technology, there's like so many barriers to just like walking in and getting to the people that actually make the decisions. You have to go through all of this kind of red tape.
Just to do anything that we see in the Twitter thing with Elon Musk. I mean, being able to basically run the same app with a third of the staff or something is quite telling of how much bloat a lot of companies have these days. We mentioned the ESG people.
Yeah, there's of course the bloat, but there's the scale as well. Like it's not just going to be one mom and pop.
The bloat scales it up as well, right? So
it's two sides of the same coin.
I guess. Yeah. We have a super chat here real quick from Fjolnir for 750 Icelandic kroner, which I still don't know how to calculate in my head. Norwegians have no bootstraps with their 30-hour work week and constant days off. You're right. We have no bootstraps, and we're happy that way. All right. We like to spend time with our family and with our properties and taking it easy. That's what we do. We have more important stuff to do than stay at work, and there's like 4 hours of sunlight each day, so I want to get out of here, damn it. Get a couple of vitamin D's in me.
I do think you have a certain portion of the Norwegian population that are bootstrappers, right? But it's not a high percentage. Yes. I'd say maybe like 2 to 3% of the population that have that mentality. But it's not big enough to be representative in politics, and a lot of them just end up moving out if they have success, right? But I think that's a nice way we could segue into the question that you post on the community tab.
Yeah, sure.
yesterday, the question where we talked about, like, the bootstrap mentality, right? And where does it come from? Because in Europe, like I said, it exists. There are people who think like that, but it's not enough to really be represented culturally, and not really enough to be like a political bloc where you can come out as a politician with talking points around bootstrapping yourself or pulling yourself up by the bootstrap, and that's going to be received with applause and charity and so on. But in the United States, that's a little bit different. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Witticism.
Yeah, I do. I have a theory. I mean, I think, well, for a lot of the comments said that it was the Protestant work ethic, and that's true. That's what their parents and grandparents grew up with. But boomers, I think, grew up in an idea or a individualistic ontology. I mean, it's kind of all about the individual and just how much you can bootstrap max, and you'll be rewarded for it. But everything in their life was individual. I think that's the difference. I mean, all the comments that I got that were against me were really just attacking myself and my individuality and the way my own personal work ethic, which is ridiculous. But they see that as a threat. In any sort of community, they see that as a threat. Everything in their way of life was freedom of expression and free love and sex and rock and roll and driving around in your car. And it's just kind of the American dream is kind of based on gritting your teeth and putting in the hours, and the American system will reward that. And I think, their enemies back then were communism. I mean, in the Cold War, that was the biggest enemy. Going back, the big historical shadow was Mustache Man. And so any sort of authoritarianism or communism or fascism, these are all the worst outcomes for people. You just have to, I don't know, the zeitgeist was just individualistic. That makes sense?
You have Mustache Man, you try to be, contrary to the Mustache Man, and there's like thicker Mustache Man in Russia who they have to be contrary. So I mean, that's where you get the term like Judeo-Christian, I think, because you have to be, if they're atheists in Russia, in Soviet Russia, then you have to be kind of as religious as possible, as individualistic as possible. And I think of course there's some residues from that. There's also like the documentary I like to go back to, The Century of the South by Adam Curtis, where he does make the point that there's been a concerted effort from corporate America to basically, quote unquote, diversify or to individualize the American population and to create, sort of what you'd call like a culture around individualistic consumer habits instead of collective consumer habits, in a sense. So that's also a part of creating this this individualism. But I mean, the collective is sort of broken up, but you still have the
target audience or
the spirit, so the kind of frontier spirit of self-preservance and gritting your teeth and really pushing through. And I mean, it's good. That's something really good. The problem for me is that it gets so perverted with the boomers, where they have this idea that you have to do everything yourself and you should just move out of your house. Like that's so many of these Dave Ramsey videos, he comes back to that point, right? You have people who are calling in about economic problems and he'll ask them to move out of their parents' house. The problem is that that's just a kind of an economic suicide, in my view, because the rents are high, like the entry-level jobs, like you said, the wages are low, and you end up as a sort of a wage slave, in a sense. I mean, I don't know
like
how...
It's like someone, calling in saying that they don't know how to swim, right? And he says that the best way to learn to swim is to go cliff diving, right? And I mean, yeah, I guess you're going to find out real quick if you're going to make it, but you learn how to swim by having someone, help you with the first couple of steps, right?
Yeah,
That doesn't
typically.
mean you
You're-
have to take money from them, but I mean, you're gonna if you've been, learned helplessness, basically, if that's what you got, and now you're stuck in your parents' basement and you're in debt,
I
like
think
putting yourself on the deep end isn't gonna fix your problems right away. For some people, it might, but that's a very small amount.
they grew up in the most incredible economic period in American history where I think you could jump off the cliff and you would swim. It was easier. I don't know. Somehow you had an easier chance of being able to swim. I mean, most of the boomers I personally know, they all had parents who were raised incredibly poor, like really, really poor. And they were often the first generation to graduate high school or college or have a very well-paying job. And they would say that it was the rising tide of capitalism that lifted them all into better standards of
Mhm.
living than their parents.
Mhm.
That was kind of the norm as everybody jumped off the cliff and they all swam.
Yeah. Well, that was because the waters were above, like there were no cliffs really because the water was rising, right?
Mhm.
So, um,
It
but that's
actually
sort of what I'm
was.
getting from your video and from watching Radlib as well. That the problem in the U.S. now, I don't know if you can talk about where you live, Witticism, but and of course the U.S. is a big country, but there seems to be it's not that there's a labor shortage, it's that there's a huge labor mismatch between, you know, a bunch of people who want to work, but they can't work they can't work at Burger King for $12 an hour. And the other alternative, you need to have like a 5-year degree to do.
Yeah, these jobs are all gate kept compared to what they used to be. And the jobs that weren't gate kept back in the day are either all gone or, the wages are just not worth it anymore. Like, you could be a milkman in the 50s and have 4 kids and a big house and survive. Whereas today, no one can really do that. I mean, both parents have to work just to survive because there's just so many people in the
Yeah.
economy, or in the workforce.
And there's been certain structural changes to the country as well. I mean, I don't have the graph here, but you could look this up. I mean, in terms of wage growth for the average American, the American wage has basically been stagnant since the 1980s, right? If you account for inflation, there's been no growth. Even though there's been productivity growth, there's been no actual wage growth. So it's been standing still. Rents going up, grocery prices are going up, the prices of other things are going up, and there's also the increasing kind of managerialism of the system where, I mean, this is of course things you see in other developed countries as well, that the expected kind of minimum standard of where you have to be to live has been raised. Like they'll have demands on the electrical sockets that you have in your house, how you create your roof, the way your garden looks, how you have to raise your kids, it's the amount of education you need and so on. So like the minimum is so much higher than it was. In the past you could just live in a shack on just like rice, on rice cans and other canned foods and make it like that, or live in your van. But now there seems to be such a heightening, in a sense, like the floor has been raised so high in terms of just the minimum. So that really caps people's ability, I think, to do the bootstrapping thing, because they're struggling just to make what society has kind of deemed the minimum thing. And if you don't live up to that, I mean, you're kind of a leper in a sense. I mean, you could say that this is an individualistic country and everybody's an individual and so on, but I mean, people, I think you will be ostracized. Let's say that if you don't have the right amount of heat in your house, the child protective services will come and take your kids away from you, and all kinds of stuff like these state agencies will get involved in your life if you try to do things a little bit differently. So there's pressure from both sides in terms of the rising prices and the state coming in telling you that you can't live. You have to have a certain cap on the way that your life is. So I don't know if you agree with that, but that's sort of how I see the problem conceptualized.
Well, one, boomers are kind of corporate simps, and they let the corporation just do whatever they want to do, and that's had a big effect. So if they want to automate your job to increase their profit margins, well, so be it, because profit is the point of a company, and we can't stop that. If you want to outsource your job to or, if the corporations want to outsource your job to China so that Ling Ling can make the same thing you do for 5 cents, well, so be it. Who are we to tell these people no? If they want to tear down a treasured piece of land to build an expensive apartment complex on it, well, so be it. That's not our place to do. If the farmer wants to sell his land to a Chinese corporation, which is really, part of the Chinese government, well, so be it.
Yes.
And any sort of interference of that is labeled fascist and communist and authoritarian, and you might as well just start goose stepping and citing,
Yeah,
Das
which
Kapital.
it's to use our favorite new framing tool. It's a very extreme thing to do. I mean, selling your land to basically foreign nationals or foreign governments. It's a very extreme act, and the sensible solution would obviously be no. We don't do that.
I'm going to steal some lingo from George Soros on this one. Actually, the term market fundamentalism comes to mind here, and you see this with Dave Ramsey as well. Like the idea that it's just like, okay, whatever the market says, that's the truth, right? If the market price is supposed to be this, then I'm just following the market. I'm always innocent in a sense. The sensible thing is to always just follow the market price and do whatever.
But that only works in a free market, bloody Pat.
Yeah,
we haven't lived in a free market in like God knows how long.
Yeah. I mean, like, you can understand that in the United States, it's a very big country, a lot of land mass, a lot of fertile land where people can live, and the attitude is just going to be the kind of liberal, if you don't like it, then leave, right? You can go on the other side of the hill and build your own village and have your own rules over there, and if people don't like that, then they can leave and go somewhere else. But at some point, you just run out of space. There's nowhere left to explore, and we have to actually have a conversation about the general system and the incentives and like the mechanisms that operate on a higher level than if you don't like it, leave. And I feel like that's where like people like Dave Ramsey fail completely, is that they can't see a conversation beyond, if you don't like it, you're a wussy and you should just buckle up and bootstrap yourself and grit your teeth through the top and stop complaining.
Yeah, before the election, I went to a town meeting that my state senator was going to be at, and somebody asked him directly, like, what's your position on, foreign companies buying our land? And his answer was basically just straight up, well, it's hard to tell that guy who and who not he can sell his land to, which is bizarre to me. I don't know. To me, I come from like a nationalist perspective where you would never do that just out of the sake of your own people. You wouldn't sell them down the river like that.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Ludwig Pass, but I think we now have explicit laws about selling, infrastructure to Chinese companies, right?
Yeah, there's at least been taken some initiative to avoid that from happening, and I think countries with any kind of sense should have that on the books. It's interesting, as you said, Witticism TV.
That being said, I mean, we're basically owned by the U.S. military at the same time. I mean, but hey, I mean,
we can't help it. We're in the first
you're
world,
at least
right?
putting your eggs in one basket instead of of just juggling them and watching them drop to the ground cracked, right? So
yeah. But I saw in your Dave Ramsey video, Witticism, that the commenters were accusing you of being liberal. It's pretty interesting, like the idea that if you don't want to sell land to China, you're basically liberal, or if you don't, or if you want to have some kind of nationalist solution to economics, and that's a liberal.
It's like
way
horseshoe theory. Yeah, you go so far right, you end up on the other side of it.
Well, I mean, we have commented on it quite a couple of times that I'm sure we probably have more in common with a lot of tankies than the modern conservative.
Yeah, the modern conservative is nuts, right?
We have a couple of super chats here that I've neglected for a bit. I didn't want to interrupt the conversation. Fjolnir says, everyone in Iceland wants to become like Norwegians, but we still keep working overtime for some reason. Well, that sounds like a you problem, Fjolnir. Lord Huger, European History and Lore. Bootstrap mentality, although outdated in the workplace, may be necessary for us politically. No one is coming to save you. Fine, I'll do it myself. That is a good thought. And certainly the bootstrap mentality shouldn't be, discarded as a whole. It is still, an important impetus.
Yes,
for
not to be
certain people
misunderstood.
to have. Yeah.
I want highly motivated individuals who are willing to make sacrifices and do everything they can. What I don't want is like you do it by yourself. You have to do it with other people. This has to be a communal or social effort. It cannot be something you solve as an individual. Like, you're not going to solve politics as John Rambo running into Parliament with the machine guns. In your bare chest screaming, right?
Yeah.
Heinrich the 13th saw that comment and took it personally.
Yeah, he tried to. Well, it is still not clear for me, having read that article, if Heinrich the 13th was the ringleader here, or if he just was the sort of the guy they had pegged. Or, I mean, he must have had something to do with it, but it seems unclear how much of a leader he was of that group at this point. But yes, he certainly did a "I'll do it myself" moment, I guess.
Well, we'll do it live. Fuck it.
We'll do it live.
Bill O'Reilly government takeover.
Yes. Individual bootstraps are worth less than collective jackboots.
Yeah, it's perfect. But I mean, of course, the bootstrap metaphor, by pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, it is supposed to be funny, right? Because you can't actually do that. It's physically impossible to do so, and so it's supposed to be kind of ridiculous, and that's why I want to highlight it as ridiculous. Because of course, grit and perseverance and fighting spirit, it's great, but you can't do it by yourself. That's kind of the point. And again, that's why I want to bring it back to Dave Ramsey again, because he every solution to the problems that are being put up is like the common sense and bootstrapping, right? This sort of common sense and grit. But we don't really live in a common sense world, right? We live in a world that is propped up by a Federal Reserve that decides the interest rates, where they've had low interest rates for so long now that it's considered just common sense that the best way to get rich is just to borrow money and put it in assets that don't really have any necessarily high market value, right? It's just cash is trash. Borrow money and put it in assets, and over time it will just compound and it will make you rich. And of course, to me, this is not a healthy economy. A healthy economy is that people actually create businesses that have valuable services, living, breathing services that are provided to people, not dead assets. Like, say, real estate. You could argue, of course, that people, you have to manage the property, and you have to do, find the tenant, and there's a turnovers of the tenant and management and so on. But say something like art, for instance, which is a way that a lot of people have gotten rich. I mean, a lot of, say, Larry Fink's fortune is in high art and collecting rare art pieces. It's a thing that you could do if you're well established and you have a lot of money. You could just borrow money at low interest rate and just buy art, and it just goes up in value. And now you've gone from a millionaire to a billionaire. And for what exactly? You just own some dead assets. And that's kind of the economy that we've been in, I think, for the last almost maybe 30, 40, 50 years, where that's just seen as that's the standard in a sense. And it's very difficult for me to take someone like Dave Ramsey seriously when he's trying to just push on this kind of common sense. You have to just do it the right way, when the economy is just rigged in a certain way that you have like optimal solutions in terms of using debt to get wealthy. And he's just telling people that you should just stay away from debt at all costs. So I don't know if any of you have some ideas around that.
The rat race of the modern economy doesn't look anything like what the boomers grew up doing, right?
Being debt free is important, and I think that is the one positive aspect of Dave Ramsey. I mean, his investing ideas are outdated and kind of doomed to fail from the start, but being debt free is important. I think, as far as like the dissonant right goes, you do need to be somewhat independent. I mean, you can't be like just completely indebted to these people if you're ever going to try to fight back against them. Because I remember when the trucker convoy was going through Canada, I had this idea way before they even did it. I was I was thinking, oh, we could do like strikes, like we could do a trucker strike in DC. And 3 days, these people would starve and have no gas. That'd be a good idea. And that's not exactly what happened in Canada. It was basically just a big moving protest. But I
Well, I mean,
remember,
it's a good idea, but I mean, we saw what happened in Canada in terms of how they're going to punch back, right?
but I remember hearing that there was going to be a trucker convoy starting here in America, and I watched just one interview with some trucker they had pulled off the street, and they asked him, what do you think? And he said, well, I'd like to, but I can't afford to take that much time off of work. Like, I have bills to pay. And that pretty much sums up America.
Oh, it's
right
perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Because, I mean, as much as I will sit and poo-poo Dave Ramsey, I do have a certain respect for what he's been doing in trying to help people out of debt. He's probably done more positive for like our side of the political spectrum than I think any of us, and I mean anybody in the DR, have not done as much as he has done in his lifetime with getting people out of debt, because a person that is kind of debt free in a sense can refocus their energy to something else, he's sort of freed up so much energy, I think, in particularly like red state populations, right, to do something else. And of course I don't have any graphs in terms of like the measurability of that outcome, but I just imagine that if you've gotten, say, 1 million people from being up to their necks in consumer debt to being debt free, then you've freed up like 1 million possible dissidents, right?
Yeah.
So could we get like a picture of Dave Ramsey on the screen, because I think we should try to go through a little bit of his biography and talk a little bit about him and his project, and have some interesting discussions around it.
Do a quick Google search here, and that's probably going to bring him up. Do we have him on his show? That would be better. Yeah, here's a picture of him on his show. This is the usual face he makes when someone calls in, so that's good.
The boomer stank face.
So there you got him. How about you talk a bit about I haven't sort of no idea who this guy was before I stumbled over him online a couple of years ago, and then I forgot about him until now, basically. So for a layman like me, who the hell is this guy?
Well, here he is at his call-in show, right? Just before I start, I actually wanted to make a sort of skit with like Alex Jones calling into the Dave Ramsey show, talking about like how he's supposed to pay off like $1 trillion lawsuits.
That's a great idea.
With like rice and beans, and bootstrapping himself out of that.
I had Kanye on, and that didn't help.
Okay, but yeah, this guy was born in 1960, right? So I think he's then very well qualified as a boomer. A lot of people that we talk about as baby boomers, they have the baby boomer mentality, or they're born a little bit. They're actually Gen Xers who think like boomers, but this guy's like actual certified boomer in Tennessee, and that's where he's located. His business, Ramsey Solutions. His current estimated net worth is $200 million, right? And he's debt free, at least so he claims himself, which is quite impressive. So, I mean, the way he got this way, he was born into a family of real estate agents. So he's always been involved with real estate and finance most of his life. I mean, it's a sort of interesting aside. I didn't realize that, but it's apparently incredibly easy to become a real estate agent in the United States. You just have to like take a course, and then you get like this licensing exam where you just check off certain answers, and then you can go and sell houses, basically. Is this correct, Witticism?
I'm pretty sure that's true. It's not very gate kept profession, which is why you see a lot of mothers get into it.
Yes, because you see, just for contrast, in Norway, you have to have taken at least like a 3-year education in a business school with a specialization in real estate, and then you need at least 2 years, maybe as sort of an apprentice or an intern in a sort of real estate agency before you get a certified real estate license. And the part of the reasons for that is because there's so much insurance money that goes into these transactions, right? I don't think it's the same way in the in the United States, but that's the way it is in Norway. Alternatively, if you want to do it, if you're a lawyer, you're qualified to sell and sell real estate. I mean, the way that it works in the United States also, I think it's the same way as in Norway, where they just use these kind of apps and platforms and newspapers, and the buyers interact directly with the real estate agents, correct?
Yes.
Because I know in like countries like the UK, you have like one real estate agent on both sides of the transaction. And I think there's some other countries as well that do it that way. I mean, it sounds bizarre to me, but you have just two agents.
Usually, yeah. In Norway, it's usually just the one.
Yeah. So
I haven't done too much real estate stuff, so I can't say how that works all the time. But from the couple of times I've either seen it done or been part of it, it's usually just been one real estate agent that sort of represents both the buyer and the seller.
No, it represents the seller, right?
Sorry, the
buyer,
seller. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. The buyer represents themselves.
Yes. And of course, you can sell it by yourself if you're using, there come certain app solutions and stuff to do that. I mean, I'm getting way too into the weeds here, but like this is the background he grew up in, like having two parents who were into real estate, and because of that, he gets an education in finance and real estate as well, and starts, flipping houses, and he was able to basically build up a fortune of $1 million, and this is in the 1980s, so it's the real millionaire. It's not like this. If you're a millionaire today, it's a little bit different. I mean, for those who don't know, the idea of like the house flip is, you buy a house and then you resell the house. You might just sit on it for a little bit and resell it for a higher price to a different buyer, or you can, buy the house, spend 2 months fixing it up, and resell it at a higher price. Because of these house loans are secured, it's a lot easier to get, to borrow money. I think housing is the thing that banks are the most willing to borrow against. And at the time when he was operating, he was able to get mortgages with zero money down, meaning like they are 100% financed. Like he doesn't put any money on the table himself. So he was able, both because of his education and his family connections, to get a bank connection and then just buy properties with 100% debt, do a little bit of repairs and, like a paint job, and then resell it for a higher price. And then you maybe earn like 10,000 to 100,000, depending on the individual cases. So he was doing that for a while and had accrued a very large amount of debts. I mean, his net, say like without the debt, his actual, net worth was 1 million. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up like the nets and the
Right.
The other terms, but he also had like more than 1 million in debt, which is typical. I mean, if you're doing real estate, it's real estate and debt sort of go together in a sense. Like you had the what was that Chinese company? It was called Evergreen or something. The Chinese housing company that had to go bankrupt because
I don't remember it.
It's
I know what you're talking about, though. Yeah.
But this is how basically construction and real estate businesses operate, on just like massive amounts of low interest rate debts, where they keep acquiring more and more real estate. But of course, this guy was doing it as sort of a private individual, and the bank had switched ownership because of the Competitive Equality of Banking Act of 1987. Which means that, there were new rules that regulated these loans, and they called his notes, meaning that they basically said that, okay, we need this repaid. We can't have $1 million outstanding of debt to this private individual who's like, 27 years old, and we don't even know who he is. So they asked him to, you get 2 months to pay the loans back. And because of the illiquidity of like the solidity of real estate as assets, that's basically impossible. Right, so he had to bankrupt himself, and so then now we're in 1988. He's completely bankrupt, and he has to try to build himself back up again through just taking jobs like financial advisor work. And this is not like in a very professional sense. He was just doing this through his church, and teaching courses and just helping people, like you're just being referred by a friend to another friend and so on. and this started to sort of snowball, where he had a few people come and see his lectures on finance, until he had like a vast amount of people coming to see it, to the point where he was able to self-publish a book in 1992 that was called Financial Peace, which basically means that self-publish. It sounds sophisticated. From what I understood, he just like printed it in his basement and sold it out of his car. But
really?
it's very much like.
Well, I mean, he's industrious, if nothing else, right?
Yeah, the hustler, like real hustler.
Attitude. On his website, they have a picture of his actual car and him when he was young, handing out books out of the trunk.
So this is where he gets started, right? But that's where he's able to to have the consulting services, to sell the books, and then to have like the talk radio stuff. I mean, currently, like the Dave Ramsey Show is one of the most popular American talk radio shows. I think it's close to number 2, at least number 2 or number 4, depending on the source you consult. But we're talking about maybe about 14 million listeners, right? Who tune into this show. So it's very popular. It's been going for a long time. So he's just been gradually building up his financial advice empire, from just doing lectures in church, to doing books, to doing talk radio, to basically now you have like the idea of like the Ramsey Solutions. I think it's called the Lampo Group LLC. That's the actual name of the corporation that works under the title Ramsey Solutions. And now he is basically rich, right? He owns this company and sort of sits as the sole. I think, at least, I wasn't able to find any websites that offer like good detailed information on ownership of corporations. If anything like that, the Witticism, like if I want to see ownership of American LLCs, is there some registry I can look up?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. That's not my area. I'm sure you could, though.
Yeah, usually there is, but you have to at least know where to look. I find that Google is just being less and less helpful these days. I don't know if you share the same opinion.
It sucks. It's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I used to think like
it's all just approved stuff that bubbles to the top, and you got to go super deep for anything useful.
I mean, I remember like in the early 2010s, I felt like whatever I wanted, it just found it instantly. It was just so effective at finding exactly what I wanted to see. But now it's just like you said, it's all like this kind of government approved crap that just end up at the top no matter what you search for, and it's very limited how many search results you get.
Yeah, well, good luck searching anything that's like older than 10 minutes too. It's like immediate news. If you want to find something from 10 years ago, it's horrible, almost impossible.
So you have to have the insider knowledge, right, to know where to look, or at least some experience with that. So let's see, the Lampo Group, the Ramsey Solutions. So currently, Ramsey Solutions have 1,200 employees. So about that. I mean, so it is within big business, even from a United States perspective. Big business in Norway is like 100 plus employees. Like in the United States, I think the threshold for big business is like 500 plus. So they're very well within big business. They're industry leaders, at least within their kind of niche space. And like the reason I wanted to talk about Ramsey Solutions is that it's if we look aside from like the boomerism of this guy, he has a lot of traits, and there's a lot of ways about the what he does that I find incredibly based and actually quite inspiring, because he is like the sole owner of this company, and he runs this company basically as that he talks about as a sort of crusade against debt, right? That's his idea. So he is known for having like these extremely stringent hiring practices where they have to go through multiple rounds of interviews, right? I mean, for context, this guy is an evangelical Christian, like of the Bible Belt, like sort of hardcore Duck Dynasty variety. And they'll have to go through these interviews where they will ask you about like the amount of sexual partners you have. They will ask you about what you believe in, how many times you go to church. Are you fine with like, regular sermons, and so on. So everyone who's in this company is basically, it is kind of based. It's he only hires people who are fanatics in a sense, and runs this company more or less like a type of monarchy, where he just calls the shots on everything, and he doesn't have like a board where he sits and everything is discussed and sort of voted on. He will just make decisions very quickly based on his own intuitions and his own values, in a sense. Of course, this this has led to a lot of controversy in terms of like these court cases where you have people who they've had to sign like non-disclosure agreements, and after leaving the company, they've been telling people about what's been going on there, and he's sort of tried to he's doxed people basically for talking about what's happening in the company. He's doxed journalists who've tried to interview him about like having too lax COVID restrictions. Let's see what else here. He's known for like his sort of crazy wild antics inside of the company. So I mean, this is like stuff that you just find from like these court transcripts and other things where he's done stuff like pulling out a loaded gun during meetings where he talks about like loyalty and loyalty and gossip and other things. Yeah, like bringing guns and.
This is big dick energy right here.
It is. I mean, I think about like Frank Reynolds from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or something. But I mean, it really is like this kind of Constanza, like bald man, big dick energy. Baseball bat, golf clubs, a lot of sort of eccentric stuff, right? He's apparently he's quite mild in the call-in show compared to how he is like inside of the company. But this in a sense, like this kind of structure where he will lay off people, like if he finds out that you have premarital sex, he will just fire you because of that. I mean, that's happened to about like 12 people where he's just sort of been able to figure out that they've been like women who get pregnant outside of marriage, for instance, they'll just get fired.
You can smell it on them.
Yeah. So I mean, of course, this sounds completely extreme, but you realize that it only does that because we live in this kind of managerial woke regime where there's like a completely different set of values that has been set as the default, right? But this used to be kind of the old school way of how a corporation would run, typically before the managerialism has crept in and before the Civil Rights Act and before all of these other before all the red tape and all the centralization has come in.
Dave Ramsey has instituted prima noctis laws in his in his company. He has the right to sleep with anyone's wife before they do, to ensure that she's a virgin.
No, but like this type of company, as boomerish as he sounds, it is actually very much a threat to the current regime because it really represents something out of the old days that is like a completely monarchical structure that has a value set that is foreign to like this kind of more modern, progressive civil rights era human resources values. And it's structured in a way to be as effective as possible, where you only hire people that agree with you and you put it together a group that is as homogenous as possible. The culture is micromanaged and it's always kept clean in a sense. And I actually think this is necessary, as much as I've, we've sounded soft talking about the economy and needing to help people who can't find jobs and raising minimum wage. I actually completely support the idea of having corporations where you're able to get more freedom to put together dream teams, in a sense, to actually do effective stuff. Same thing with Elon, certainly. The way Elon Musk is doing it now, like you just getting a CEO that's really more of a monarch and can take action and quickly get rid of nuisance elements, right? It's not just like this kind of childcare facility where you've just brought together this kind of diverse coalition of sexualities and races and so on. It's like an actual, like a band of pirates or something with a mission to do a specific thing. And that's why it exists, for that reason.
It's very Schmittian, friend-enemy distinction, too.
Exactly. Glow in the dark here for $5 says, the CEO, we're not going to have any problems, pulls out loaded gun is the only way to counter modernist managers. And the only way to counter modernist managers is to have an Inquisition department. And Vingel follows up with, one day, that day may never come. Dave Ramsey will call upon you for a favor. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No, I think I've just a minute.
Yep.
I think I've covered a lot of the topics in terms of how his corporation has been developed and so on. But like I said again, I don't really see any problems with this. This is kind of what we have to do in response to like the current system. There's I don't see any other alternatives than being able to kind of return to a more of to have like this structure of organization, basically. Well, and in that sense, he is like more based than any of us.
Are you going to be able to, just for fun, I think that's the way to go. But let's warn game this for a moment. Like, once the government mandates that you need to have an ESG employee, right? Are you just going to hire one of your buddies and give him that title as an honorary thing to just pay yourself out of it? Like, how do you prevent subversion?
I mean, it's a very good question. It also makes me question how he's been able to do it for as long as he has. I know that exactly. Tennessee is like a fire at will state, and I don't know how that works. Like, on one hand you have the Civil Rights Act, right, where that defends people from getting fired for, let's say, certain characteristics, whether it's due to sexuality, identity,
virginity,
and so on. But you also have like the fire at will, hire at will rules, which basically means that, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter, does it? You can just sort of say that you fire someone because you felt like it, right? But do you know anything about that Witticism? How exactly do these things work together?
He is pushing the limits of what's legal as far as how much you can do this, and he has paid the price, like an actual price, but he's rich enough he can afford to do it, because there was a woman that worked for him, and she was married to a man, and then she got divorced, and that was okay. But then she confided in a coworker that she was actually gay, and that rumor got all the way to him, and he fired her. And she sued him in court, and he settled for like $78,000. Here, shut up, go away. So he has, it's not as
so
easy as it sounds. So
you have to have the strength to pay yourself out of it, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that works, but yeah.
I'm also wondering if like the fact that he operates out of Tennessee is the reason that he's being left alone. I think that maybe a lot of these blue state institutions think that, this is kind of like flyover redneck country, and what they're doing down there is completely irrelevant. So we're not going to spend as much energy. Like, say, something like this might not be able to exist in California or New York or something.
Yeah, no way. There's no way.
So there's like a tacit.
I'm about to destroy Glow in the Dark's worldview here. He says that sex outside of marriage is normal for LGBT and blacks. Unfortunately, if the rumors are true, it is also normal for quite a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, I think it's been normalized for everyone. In the dark. Right? You might live like in a red state, but I mean, it is normal for, especially like very promiscuous behavior. I think it's normalized for these LGBT people, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's on another level. I'll give him that.
Like, I mean, for straights, there you have the concept of like serial monogamy, right? You just go from, you're not married, but just go from one monogamous relationship, and then like maybe 2 years, and then they change, and 2 years, and then they'll change again. But like for the LGBTQ people, especially like some of these like high functioning homosexuals, they basically live the Tinder lives, like
sex fades
all the time. Yeah. It's just like a porn movie all the time. It's
try finding a college age girl that's not having sex outside of marriage. Doesn't happen. So
it's quite tough that way. I mean, with black people, I think it's even it's worse, and I think they start a lot earlier as well. They reach puberty earlier.
No, that's something I've noticed in random statistics that I see online, etc. It's like the age of the debuting age, I suppose, sexually is for African Americans seems to be something like 13 or something, which is insane. Like the average.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally nuts. I mean, it made me think of a story like, like I said on Twitter, I'm going to start posting a lot more lifter and bodybuilding content on my channel. But like, you have one of these black bodybuilders that was active in the 90s and the early 2000s. His name is Flex Wheeler, right? And I remember I watched an interview with him where he was talking about his kids, right? Because he has he grew up in the hoods, right? So he has a lot of
He has a ton of kids.
And like he told a story about how he got his first kid. It's just like he was sitting on a bus, and he was like 14 or 13 years old, and some girl who's like 13 walks up to him and just gives him like a phone number or an address on a little piece of paper. And then he shows up at this address, and it's like this kind of rundown apartment, right? Where there's like you just have some kids running around there, and there's like the black grandma, like from the Miss Jackson, video, who's just sitting there, and she's looking at him, and it's like she's shaking her head, and then he's told that she's upstairs, so he just walks upstairs. They have like they walk into a bedroom, they just have sex, and then he leaves, and later he's just told that you have a kid. It's like, yeah, it's so like bizarre to think about, but like that's kind of how things happen, I think, for a lot of in those communities.
This is the average Medea movie you just described.
Yeah. All right. What more do we have on our list here of Dave Ramsey topics? We didn't get to discuss Mike Rowe, but maybe we covered that during the Boomer talk. What do you guys think?
He's very similar to Dave Ramsey. You could say
Yeah.
A lot of the points apply to him as well.
I will say that, maybe this is because I have a bit of a soft spot for Mike Rowe. But I remember watching a TED talk he did quite a few years ago, and he has quite correctly analyzed a lot of the issues with what we call the managerial state today and its hatred for the blue collar worker. And his mission seemed to be to bring back sort of the pride in that, but it is through this boomer con American bald eagle patriotism type lens that he's trying to do it.
Yeah, he
which
represents
I think is
the working class a lot more than like Dave Ramsey does.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't get to talk too much about the call-in shows, right? I don't know if you watched, you said you watched like a week almost of the call-in show, Walrus. I don't know if you have like some favorite callers.
I just let the YouTube algorithm, like I logged into like a dummy account because I didn't want to mess up my recommendations, and I let the YouTube algorithm just autoplay me Dave Ramsey highlights for while I was working. And I mean, we were talking a bit about this before the show, where the call-in show sort of makes itself after a certain point, because the amount of retards that'll just call in and ask the most stupid questions, and Dave Ramsey can call them an idiot, right? Is substantial, to say the least.
Yes, and I mean, for me, like the puzzling thing about this is that I feel like if you've watched 2 of his shows, you kind of know what he's going to say, but they keep calling in anyways.
Oh, hey, Dave, long-time listener. I love your stuff. I'm 32. My 19-year-old girlfriend wants me to buy her a car. Should I do it? Right?
Hell no. Eat beans and rice till you die, peasant.
He has like this concept of
you watch the show, you know what he's gonna say. You're just, and then we're into like Stefan Molyneux tiers of like Dr. Philism, where it's like, well, that's not why you really called. You really called because you want us to, you don't want to lose the girl, so you're afraid of saying no, and that means that she's crazy, right? Because if she can't take that no, then she's an unstable bitch. And we're not even talking about money anymore.
Well, luckily, Dave Ramsey's not that heavy into psychoanalytics, though.
No, but he had a lady call in who said, "Oh, I married a sex offender, and he's out here violating his parole. Should I support my daughter-in-law's marriage?" And I thought that was kind of outside the scope of finance stuff, but he'll include it.
Well, I do assume it, once you listen to people like that, for enough time, there is this parasocialness that builds up, even though it is probably a lot less than it is in modern, social media. And so you end up seeing them as someone who can just give you advice in general.
Yeah, and I wonder if like some people just get a kick out of calling, right? Like you said,
That
with the
might be too.
parasocial
They're
stuff, they just want
5
to
minutes of
call
fame.
and talk to him and just be on the show. Just like people
Yeah,
calling
yeah.
into radio stations requesting songs or something, they just want to participate, right? There with the YouTube chat function. But like he has this concept that's called the 7 baby steps. Can you get that up? Because I think it's very easy to find if you just
Right.
Google that and search for an article.
Well, Dave Ramsey. People will always be like, when they call in, they will be like, "Hey, we're on step 3, right?" They always like their credentials.
Yeah, it's something that you have to understand to understand the show. But of course,
it's a
it'll quickly
lingo,
explain it to
yeah.
you anyway, right? It doesn't take very long to get into.
Here it is. Okay. So, step number 1, save $1,000 for your starter emergency fund. I don't want the... Baby step 2, pay off all debt except the house using the debt snowball, whatever that is.
The debt snowball actually means that you list up all the debts that you have, right? And you try to take the smallest one first. You know, say like for me, it would be maybe my student loans. It's like the smallest loan that I have next to mortgages. But you know, he just says that it's always the smallest one, regardless of interest rate, because it's supposed to have this psychological effect that you get like dopamine, you get a little bit of mastery from being able to pay off a debt, even though mathematically it would be smarter to pay off the one with the highest interest rate.
Yeah, and you cut off excess expenses. So, you cancel your Xbox Live and you take that $20 a month and you put it towards the smallest loan you have. So maybe you owe money on like a phone, but you take all your money and pay that off as quick as possible, and then you take that payment plus your extra money and you apply it to the next loan, and you create this debt snowball.
Yeah,
where you're paying it off pretty fast.
Glow in the Dark says, everyone has forgotten Papa John as an executive leader, but he will have his revenge. Those managers better watch out. One day he will return and everything will be pizza, I guess. Clear them Out says, I wish we could call into the Longhouse. Well, you can super chat, and I will definitely read your message out loud.
Should we try to do that at some point?
I think we should try to do a... maybe, yeah, that sounds like something we can try to do.
Maybe the Christmas episode or something.
Yeah, maybe the Christmas episode.
Yeah.
We're going to do next week, by the way, for those of you listening, is we're going to have Frody from Guide to Culture on to talk a bit about Scandinavia, right-wing politics, and paganism. And the week after that will be the final show for the year, which is we've named the Christmas show, which is going to just be a bit of a cozy stream where we talk about, what we're going to do in Christmas and look back on our first year of the Longhouse, pretty much. So maybe we'll do a call-in segment there, where we'll share the link and people can come on. All right, let's continue here. So the debt snowball, and then you save 3 to 6 months of expenses in a fully funded emergency fund. Then you invest 15% of your household income into retirement. Then you save for your children's college fund. Then you pay off your home early. Then you build wealth and you give.
So, I mean, for step 4, Witticism, can you just explain, for the non-Americans, what like the 401k and the IRA is?
Well, it's an account that you can put money into that you don't touch, or you're not supposed to touch, and you're penalized if you do put your hand in that cookie jar. And it's like a supplemental, or it's supposed to be a retirement fund that you can then access once you retire. So the idea is you get your house paid off, you get sort of emergency stuff paid off, and then for the next 30, 40 years, you just dump money into this 401k, and when it comes time to retire, you can pull that out and live off of it. That's the idea. But so it's also connected to the economy. I mean, it's not just a solid fund that you're dumping into. It's also it's really just putting money into stocks, really, that your company allows you to invest in.
So can you select the stocks yourself, or is the company doing it for you?
there's like you can select different ones, varying risk of varying range of risk, I should say.
Okay. Well, we have you choose like risk levels and funds, but I don't think you can select individual stocks or stock sort of collections.
Yeah, they just give you different options of risk, not specific companies. Like you can't put your 401k in like Apple stock or something.
Yeah. Glow in the Dark says BlackRock and Vanguard runs 401ks. Yeah, that makes sense.
And the college fund then is kind of a similar thing, or is that also a savings account, or is it that you put into some kind of mutual fund?
No, I think it's
account?
just a straight up. Well, yeah, you could do that. Yeah,
the college fund is
mutual
a
fund.
weird thing, yeah, for us Europeans, because it's when it's like I pay 40% income tax, so the state pays for my child's college. I have to literally say, well, that's not going to be my problem, and I'm not allowed to not. It is very strange.
But of course, it's not the same for everybody. There's a lot of European countries where you have to pay for college, or
it is
not as much as the Americans do, but the premium is significantly higher.
Certainly, if you want to go to the high quality universities, it's going to be quite expensive.
But the reason that I wanted to like bring up these baby steps is that this is like brain dead, right? Not that it's stupid, but every person who calls into the Dave Ramsey call-in show, he just goes back to this every time, and tells them, like, depending on where you are, just, okay, have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? And if you do anything else, he just tells you no. So, I mean, you can just look at this list and just you ask yourself, what would Dave Ramsey do, or what would he tell me to do? You just look at this. Just look at where you are, and okay, this is what you're supposed to be doing. But still, you have like hundreds and hundreds of people calling in, asking like these extremely kind of trivial questions, just to have this stuff read back to them. I mean, you could have like an artificial intelligence doing this, but the entertainment value wouldn't be the same, probably. And it's not insensible either. It's just that in certain cases, like you have someone who's on step 5, like say they're on step 6, right? And instead of paying off their home, they might want to like buy a rental property, which is not uncommon. Let's say like they've paid off half of their mortgage, and they can use, the equity they have in their house to try to secure a loan for a rental property at a decent deal with a good cash flow and an interest rate. And the answer is always no. Like, just no, do not do it. But it's not necessarily good advice. I mean, you could, this would have been completely manageable for a lot of the people who call in. I feel like they're almost getting snubbed a little bit by Ramsey for telling them that they have to pay off the house. But that's just my view on it.
I think there's two types of people. There's one type of person this advice is for, and it's the retards that have no idea what to do with money. And
I was going to say, if you're
huge
calling
percentage
into
of
the
people,
show, you're already someone who wouldn't. If it was someone who were off the caliber who would make money off of it, they would just do it, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there's
call Dave Ramsey about it.
There's some people that can totally handle having credit cards and handle having a manageable amount of debt, whatever that means for you and your own income. But a lot of people can't. I mean, I think Dave Ramsey treats it, and he's used this metaphor before, is like alcohol. There's just some people that, once they start drinking, they're going to have 24 locos and just go crazy and go streaking, and then there's people that can have a glass of wine and they'll be okay. But his advice is mainly for that person who goes streaking financially.
Yeah, it's very well said. But I mean, in reality, on the flip side of this, the people who have gotten rich, let's say, I think Dave Ramsey is basically a sort of unique, even though he talks about the idea of like the everyday millionaire. But you talk about the people who in our generation got rich in one generation. Most of them did it through debt, right? Through debt financed either business, acquired acquisitions or real estate acquisitions. Like say someone like, that's a little esoteric for the international audience, but Peter Stordalen, for instance, like he, it's just like hotel acquisitions and shopping mall acquisitions with debt over and over and over again, right? Most of the
It's
you know
debt,
the
or it's like government subsidized industry or contracts, right? That's
which
the
is
big two.
financed by debt. I mean,
Yeah,
of course,
fair.
there's like a small percentage of the people who will, maybe say someone like Kanye West or something, who will have a hit single or sell enough albums and concerts to become a millionaire, and they'll put it into something else, or they have like a book sale or some invention that they have. But that's like very much in the minority here. Most of the people, it's like they're able to get good debt, quote unquote, like debt with like low interest rates to buy up assets, and those assets accumulate in value, and they use that value to leverage and buy more assets. Really, that's kind of the if you read books like we've talked about, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and a lot of these kind of financial get rich advisors, that's pretty much what they tell you to do. You just take up debt to buy assets, and the assets pay for the debt. And of course, Dave Ramsey advises you against that. But I mean, it's I feel like you're running against inflation if you're trying to run against this stuff. That's kind of my view on it. That if you try to save money in your bank or anything else, the inflation just eats at it. It absolutely kills it.
Glow in the Dark says a lot of rich people got rich by networking and favors. Debt is for self-made people, and even then you need to know someone. Isn't that the plot of Eyes Wide Shut? Pretty much. Or if
they
you
got
want
rich.
to, or if you want to, Tony Montana, Scarface. Doesn't matter how much money you have, you're never going to be an elite if they don't accept you, right?
No, exactly. But I think like for a regular person, you could go to the bank and ask for a loan to buy a rental property. Let's say if you have some money, or if you've inherited some money, and they can help you with that. And if you've succeeded at one time, you can sort of keep snowballing it further.
Yeah.
In the sense that it is like the most kind of brain dead way to make money. That's accessible for regular people. There's this channel that I follow. It's called Bigger Pockets. That it's not just like this kind of Grant Cardone bravado nonsense. It's like actual people who have been able to use debt financing to build wealth quite significantly. So I mean, I think it is kind of a sensible niche, even though I see like there's very few people in the DR space who has like any interest for it at all. But I'm quite a fan of it. So yeah, that was just my little rant there. I don't know if there's like something else we should cover on the baby steps, or in terms of the Dave Ramsey show.
Well, he does advocate, just using cash only for everything, for every major purchase that you're ever going to make. If you want a car, you got to pay that car in cash. If you want a house, you need to pay that house in cash. If you're going to start a business, you need to have a huge amount of cushion to start that business, which is really, really hard to put on regular people in the economy we live in. Yeah, you just can't. That's the bottom line, which is why he gets a lot of flack.
Dave Ramsey says cash, he doesn't mean debit cards, right? He means actual banknotes.
No, he means physical cash.
Yeah. Maybe in Tennessee, boy.
Mattress, yeah.
In Norway, you try to do that. You try to pay for a car in cash, they think you're a criminal. Basically, they've kind of
literally
reduced,
do.
like,
you have to. Your bank sort of, when you deposit that money, it gets flagged, and you get the IRS basically on your doorstep, more or less. Got to account for where it's from. Anyone who's ever sold a car with any sort of value in Norway will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think that aspect of cash only draws in a lot of the calls too on his call-in show, because people are naturally going to call in and be like, what do you mean I'm supposed to pay for college in cash? Like, that's just impossible. How should I do that? And he only has his, one response, which you either get it or you don't. But it does make for interesting content, because he is kind of pushing people between a rock and a hard place where, yeah, it's good to be debt free, but it's hard to live cash only.
And it only gets harder, right? I assume that Tennessee is a little bit behind. I'm ragging so much on Tennessee. I don't mean to do that, right? But I think it is in some of these states that are lagging a little bit behind in terms of the technology. And it's not just because they're late to the game. I think it's also the political inclinations of the people there, where it is legitimate to not want to implement all of these kind of fintech solutions, right? I know that Japan has like a sort of cash only policy, even though they're quite technologically advanced in other ways.
Well, it's going to be harder.
Is generally a bit different they have a bit of a different view on banking and the role of banks than we do here in the West. Banks are a lot more responsible for the outcome of their clients than they are here in the West. It's a much more of a two-way street.
Yeah, our whole economy is just debt based. I mean, that's all America is debt based, and it's really hard to not to get people out of a debt based system and say, well, you're just going to use cash, and like this is why he gets so much hate, is because the average house right now is almost $500,000. You know, the average new car, is over $40,000. Yeah, that's insane. How am I going to pay cash for that? That's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
nuts. It's just completely impossible. Like the getting out of debt, I'd say probably the first 3 steps of the baby steps are worth it, and then the step 4 through 7 are all kind of fantasy land boomer talk.
Yeah, it's easy to say if you already have a fortune, right? Um, Otherwise, I mean,
or
for
if you get
myself, if I were to imagine that I was sort of like starting from the ground with the income I have now, and let's say I didn't have a house or anything, I would be able to get to step 1 to 3 quite easily. But then it's like, okay, well, step 4, time to wait like 5 years, right? Put my life on hold while I just work like mad and build up
Yeah, the
income.
steps
Meanwhile, my wife's ovaries are drying up, and
the steps get really hard after 4.
yeah,
Of course, this is assuming a certain situation as well. It's assuming that you already have a house and that you already have kids. So,
yeah,
but
that's fair. Yeah.
but of course, he doesn't have any exception for the people. Like that's that's the people I think it's the biggest problem for. If you're renting and you don't have kids and you're approaching your 30s, right? Like and you said, the ovaries are not getting any more fertile. Can you really you have time to wait for this stuff?
Yeah.
You kind of don't, to be honest. And like with the rents just going up and the stagnant wages, the rents going up. I mean, I just don't like that approach. You need help, whether it's from the government or it's from your family or whatever. It's especially the family, and that's kind of where the biggest problems that I keep repeating, like with Dave Ramsey. It's the bootstrapping, the kind of individualistic bootstrapping mentality, because there's so many of these callers where he will just they'll call in about their kid living at home or something, and they'll just tell them to move out, to just find an apartment and move there. But because of the jobs you're going to get are so low paying, and the rents are just going to keep going up, you end up as a wage slave, and you don't get anywhere. Like, how are you supposed to save up money if everything is just going up and your wages stay the same? And how much upward mobility do you have from the perspective of this kind of dead end job? Almost nothing.
You start every generation from scratch right when they move out at 18. But
yes, exactly, and you can't do that. I mean, it is sort of an economic suicide there, and it seems to go very deep for Ramsey, this individualistic thing of just, you have to start from scratch, and everything is about the individual and the individual's money, and I earned my money, and
It's very
that's
strange because he'll say that in his call-in show, like, no one's entitled to your money, right? That doesn't, and he stresses that doesn't mean that you can't give gifts to your family, of course, but you don't owe, like, your kids shouldn't expect anything from you, and your parents shouldn't expect anything from you, right? And the other
I
way
just hate
around,
it. I hate that
which
attitude.
is so strange because that goes against like human nature, I feel, right? I mean, if I want to build a dynasty, quote unquote, I'm willing to help my family succeed across generational gaps, right? I mean, that's kind of
But
the
yeah.
point. My dad worked hard so that I can work even harder, and in a sense, and reach higher, and so that my children can reach even higher than I did. I mean, why else am I doing this?
Yeah, that's kind of the whole that's the whole point. And I know it, like, you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, you have white privilege, or you have this kind of privilege, or you need to check your privilege." But that's kind of the whole point of the whole thing, is I'm getting some privilege so that my kid can be more successful than me. And, if you're not giving your kid privilege, I mean, we all kind of look down on those people. Like, you're not doing the right thing. You're not giving them any sort of privilege, which is kind of It's just opposite of how it should be.
I agree, and I mean this goes very far with Dave Ramsey as well. But I wish I had sort of stored a log of all of these calls that he had done for this episode. But there's this one episode where there's like some person calling in, and she's talking about her dad, right? And her dad became like a multi-millionaire on some patent or some like dumb investment that he made in the 90s. And now he's like getting into old age, and he's found some kind of like sugar babe that he's going to marry, right? And all of his inheritance is going to go to some like young woman who's like younger than his daughter, who just kind of swooped in at the last minute. And like the advice that he gives is like, well, yeah, no, you're not entitled to your dad's money, that's his money, that's but I mean, god damn it, I understand how the law works. But I think that within the law, within the framework of what's legal, I think that those kids should do everything they can to persuade their dad not to do this, right?
He says that you have no lawful right or entitlement to your dad's money in that sense, but he also says that you have no moral claim on his money, which I think actually is wrong. It's not that you deserve it just for being born, but I mean, if you were part of the family unit, then someone coming from the outside just taking that money is obviously wrong, right?
Yes, and I think like in other, say,
you
like
could say
in
that
Rome,
you shouldn't expect to get that money. That's one thing. You shouldn't live your life expecting to inherit, all your parents' riches, if any, right? That's good advice, I suppose. But to say that someone else can freely come and take it, I mean, that's obviously wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I do think in places like Greece and Rome, there were like laws against, let's say, if you were a father and you squandered money, you would be punished for squandering your kids' money, basically, or that the children could sort of sanction the parents if they sort of squandered money, because it's the family's money. Like it's not just theirs as an individual. That's like this, it's like this much more enlightenment, or this very modern concept, and particularly like with the sugar daddy example. I mean, they should just do everything. I would even look through my fingers if they did something dirty there to get the money out of there, because what's the value of that? I mean, are we going to be individualists to that point where it's like we have to protect fathers, horny dads who want to squander all of their like parents and their grandparents' money on
He's
some
just mad that this other woman
some
is
young
prettier
gold
than
digger,
her.
right?
She can't seduce her own dad or something. Yeah.
Yeah, you
We're
have the
getting
wrong
into weird
mindset, right?
territory.
Yeah, you're being held back by your mindset. It's just jealousy and envy. It says so in the Bible. This is pure jealousy. You're coveting your dad.
Well, you just have to out bootstrap your dad's hot girlfriend.
That's true. Yeah.
It's jealousy, and people are jealous of the hustler attitude. You should find your own sugar daddy and solve the problem that way.
It speaks volumes about this woman's mindset that she hasn't found herself a sugar daddy yet. That's the issue here. All right. I think with that, it seems like we might be getting to the end of this stream. Do you guys have anything else that you would like to talk about regarding this, or is there anything in the chat that caught your eye?
I'm good.
I didn't read the chat, unfortunately, so unless you've saved up some questions, then I don't have anything.
No, I think we handled them, the comments as we went. I feel the only thing I would highlight from Vingle was a while ago now, but Boomer Luddick making Outcast references the kids won't get.
Yeah, maybe the Zoomers don't know about that stuff. Is Outcast still active? Does anyone know?
I have no idea. Let me check. 2007 and then a stint in 2014, apparently. Well, it says present, but they reissued Stankonia, the album, in October 2020 to commemorate the 20th anniversary. So, no, they're not really active anymore.
Well, yeah, it's not mumble rap or funk, so I guess the Zoomers don't understand what it is. But it was like this, pop hip hop group that were popular in like
Yeah.
the 2000s, and they had the hit song that's really it's called Miss Jackson. There's a funny music video where they use like these animals and everything, and it's just about the the baby mama in a sense, like the black men who have kids with their girlfriends early, and they oh shit, we were just like 14 or 13 or whatever, and
Yeah.
it was impossible to hold it together. So the song is just like kind of just an apology to the grandmother
Did
in
we
a
lose
sense.
Ludwig? I
Do
we
you hear
lost
me?
him. Is it me?
No, I'm still hearing you, so I'm not sure. It
Hang
seems
on,
like
it
my
might be on
connection
my
is
end.
still
Just
good.
keep talking.
Keep talking, and nobody dies. Right. Well, I think that sums it up. Outcast, Miss Jackson. That was the song. It was on MTV when they were still playing music. I think that was very
Hello?
much at the tail end of it. Hello,
Oh, okay, we're back. Yeah, sorry. I don't know what happened.
we're back.
Yes, we're so back. Fjolnir says, what if the dad's rich, but the kid won't have any children? Well, that's the beauty of this, of family relations, Fjolnir. It's a two-way street, right? The dad can say, I won't give you any inheritance if you don't have any children. Right?
Yeah, that's actually kind of fair, to be honest. I mean, it's the responsibility to the people who are dead and the people who are not yet born, right?
Exactly.
So there has to be an agreement both ways.
Now, of course, you would ideally instill this into your children, from a young age. It's kind of bad form to drop this on them when they're like 25 or something. But I don't.
No, Dave.
don't,
surrogacy doesn't count.
Yeah.
I don't care, David. You're still not getting an inheritance.
But I don't think that's going to be any issue if you're clear with your kids from the start, right?
It's a dicey topic. I wish I had the answers, honestly. There seems to be no kind of way to
family
go
relations
about it.
is difficult, but I mean that's why it's family relations as well, right? You gotta take the good with the bad, but at the end of the day, you gotta love each other, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on.
Based mom Fjolnir. Yeah, that's a good way to end it. Check out Witticism's YouTube channel, Witticism TV. He's on Twitter as well and Telegram. In my opinion, an underrated channel. Bloody Path, you have a Twitter, you have a YouTube channel for the memes. We have the Matrix Longhouse channel in the description down below if you'd like to chat with the people who enjoy this show or see if we post any funny stuff. I am also on Twitter, and as I am reading this, I will post a meme that I made before the stream started that is either going to be the worst or the best thing I've posted in a while. So go check that out right now and follow my Twitter. There's also the Telegram channel, and let's put it this way: if we're going to end up doing a call-in show on the Christmas episode, the link is going to come out in the Matrix channel. There's going to be no other place to get it. So if you're interested in appearing as a call-in guest here, you're going to have to join our Matrix. That's a good idea to push people in. All right. Anything you would like to add before we end for the evening? Nope. All right. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week. Next week is Scandinavian right-wing politics and paganism with Frody from Guide to Culture. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.